about how chestnuts were essentially wiped out by chestnut blight. At least American chestnut was wiped out as an overstory tree, right? They persist in the understory as little stump sprouts growing at the bases of long dead trees, right? So it wipes out the trees, but the roots stay alive, and then as they keep resprouting. Over time, though, through attrition, most of those trees are gone too. So we went from what people guessed was maybe about 4 billion trees in the forest to now, there's speculation that there still might be about 400 million trees. But they're not 17-foot diameter trees anymore, right? Probably what you're going to find in the forest, something that looks like this. Something that's tiny, something that keeps dying back from blight, like this one did, and then resprouts. And they might die and resprout a couple of times, and then they may finally give up. Most of the time, they'll just stay like this if there's a canopy. But if there's a break in the canopy, they'll shoot up. Sometimes they get big. Sometimes they start to flower. Mark talked all about the whole flowering of the trees, right? So flowering trees are important to us. You can imagine why. After Mark described how important the tree was and how the tree was wiped out by blight, he talked about 3 methods for trying to bring the American chestnut back. Remember what those 3 methods were? There was biotech. That's the work that they're doing up at SUNY, where they inserted a gene into chestnut. It sounds really cool, but like everything we're talking about, it is so much more complicated than we could ever describe in this short meeting, right? There's a lot involved in that. It's not a perfect silver bullet, but it's a great, great tool. He talked about breeding. That's what I mostly do. I've been working with the American Chestnut Foundation since 2008, and I got my degree in American chestnut genetics and silviculture. I've primarily worked on traditional style breeding, where we make hybrids, like this hybrid that I brought in. This is a 1-year-old tree that we produced through hybridization. This is a very nice looking tree, and I can tell you the reason why I brought this tree was to show you what an American chestnut tree looks like. This is a perfect specimen of an American chestnut. Mark had talked all about the different characteristics of what makes an American chestnut. We're going to review that again in my presentation because I want you guys to really firmly be able to identify an American chestnut and know it from some of the lookalikes. The reason why I think this is a good tree to look at is because this illustrates how good of a job we're doing with our breeding program. This tree, for all intents and purposes, is an American chestnut. But a lot of the trees that we produce in our program have some of those genes for resistance, right? The whole idea of the breeding program is to capture some of the Chinese genes enough that the tree may be able to make it in the forest. And you were asking about, well, is that as good of a method if the transgenics is a good method? It's really complicated. Transgenics is complicated, breeding is complicated, and we're discovering now that it's more complicated than we even thought. But it's a good method for a lot of reasons. It's a good method because we're creating a tree that has all of the genes came originally from the same genus, right? So it's either Chinese chestnut or American chestnut. This tree has a chance to continue to evolve using multiple genes to express multiple traits that will help this tree co-evolve with blight. Instead of a one-gene solution like transgenics, where it's either you're blocking the pathogen or the pathogen gets through and kills you, this is taking it back to a natural approach where the trees survive in the forest and you can have that sort of co-evolutionary process take over again. So what we're trying to do with our traditional breeding approach is create self-sustaining populations of trees that won't be perfect. They won't have perfect blight resistance, but if they have enough tolerance, they'll be able to keep surviving and growing in the forest. And eventually, over time, they'll develop that relationship with chestnut blight. And we think that that's an important tool as much as transgenics. The third thing Mark talked about, the first thing he talked about really, was hypovirulence, or biocontrol, right? So you got breeding, biotech, and biocontrol. We call that the 3-burr program. Burr like a chestnut burr. We say 3-burr. Breeding, biotech, and biocontrol united for restoration. Remember what Mark said with the hypovirulence program is that with the super donor, thank you so much. With the super donor program, did you all get it that what they did was create by using genetic modification, they made a strain of blight fungus that is vegetatively compatible with all the other strains. So when that blight fungus strain, when that blight fungus is carrying the virus, it can infect any other strain out there with the virus. That's the idea with the super donor, right? So they have a strain that they can put out there. The reason why hypovirus doesn't spread from tree to tree naturally or from blight to blight naturally is because of the incompatibility. So by genetically modifying a blight fungus that happens to be carrying the virus, it can be spread to any other blight fungus. So that's a really good approach. The transgenics is a good approach. Traditional breeding is an interesting approach. I think it's a great approach. It's because it's what I do. Anyway, I'm going to come back. We'll look at this tree a little bit more because I want to look at the characteristics again, like Mark talked about. But anyway, so I'm just going to go on with my presentation. Oh, hang on. While I'm up here just rambling. In talking about our different approaches to dealing with chestnut blight, you can see that 2 out of 3 of the approaches, the biotech or the transgenic approach, and of course the breeding approach where we're making all these crosses with Asian and American trees, we need a lot of American chestnuts. They're crucial to our program. We need to be out there finding them. I talked about how there was 4 billion trees, but after the chestnut blight, they've been reduced to scattered stump sprouts growing at the bases of long dead trees. We need to find them. And we need to find them from different ecoregions all over the country. So that's what I want to talk about today, is how can you guys help us find those trees? If you guys like hiking in the woods, sooner or later, you're going to find chestnut trees. Probably some of you have already found them in the woods, right? So we need to know about them. So I'm going to talk about today is where can you find chestnut trees? You know, what could help you give some tips for finding them, for looking in the right places, how to identify chestnuts, and how to identify them compared to some lookalike species. I'm going to spend a little time on that. And then we'll talk about how you can get that information to me. How you can give me leaf samples, how you can record information on this app called Tree Snapping.
All right, so when you say a chestnut tree, are the stump sprouts, what you're talking about, those are legitimate for you to use?
Yes, they are. I want to know about all of them. Okay. Now, I'm looking for some trees more than others. If they're flowering, that's better, right? Because if it's flowering, then we can go and put pollen on it. Or we can go collect seeds from it. And one of the things that we really like to do is get pure American seeds from these wild trees. And a lot of them are flowering. Lots of them. Every year, every fall, we go out and find new sources of pure American chestnut trees in the woods. And we'll go and we'll harvest seeds from them. And those go into something we call a germplasm conservation orchard. That's where we keep pure American chestnuts from different sources. We grow them up, and yes, they're susceptible, and yeah, sometimes they get blight and die back. But a lot of times we pamper them, they keep coming back, and we can get flowers on them. And we use those in our breeding program. It's a lot easier for us to move that American germplasm out of the mountains and into these orchards where you've got multiple sources to work with in one location, monitoring flower development, for instance. You can go to the orchard and say, these trees need another week, and these trees are ready tomorrow, and these trees didn't produce flowers this year. So you come back with your volunteers and you start pollinating trees. If you have to go up to the mountains and you drive an hour and then hike in an hour and you get your tree and it's hard to see and you get through the binoculars and go, oh, we missed it, or it needs another week. Or it's not really a chestnut tree, it's a sourdough. True story. Okay, I don't have much time, but I'll tell you a funny little story. There was a meeting we were at Pine Mountain State Park. We were having this meeting, and somebody looked out, and out on the mountain there was a blooming chestnut tree. It was covered in burrs, and it was a beautiful tree. It probably had 30 or 40 burrs on it. We went out there, we pulled the burrs off. They were all duds. What that means is there wasn't another pollen source. Trees by themselves are self-infertile, so it needs another pollen source. So this tree had female flowers, but no other sources of pollen, right? That's something we want to know about. That's actually great. That spares us the arduous process of climbing up into the tree and putting bags on the flowers. All we had to do was wait for the female flowers to be ready, and then we went out and we could go out there with a pollen spray, and we just spray a cloud of pollen over the tree. Then you come back in the fall and you knock the burrs off and you collect all the seeds. So it's a really nice way to do it. So confirming that there was no pollen source was great. But by then, we couldn't get the seeds from it. We had to wait until the next spring to pollinate it. So I asked a volunteer, I said, monitor that tree. And next spring, when we're out pollinating all the trees, you let me know when this tree's ready. He goes, okay. And so the next spring comes around, I'm like, hey, you watching that tree? He's like, yeah, I went out and checked it out, and remind me what I'm looking for. And I sent him all these pictures of catkins and what the flowers look like. I said, look for this. I've got the pollen ready and the pollen sprayer. I'll come out and I'll meet you. He goes, okay. Well, in the meantime, all of our other trees are starting to bloom. I'm like, okay, this tree's going to be ready. I'm waiting for the call. Meantime, we're pollinating other trees, and I call him up and say, hey, isn't that tree ready yet? Because it's getting pretty close to time. He's like, no, I just checked it. It's not ready. I'm like, okay, all right. I'm waiting. In the meantime, we're almost done with all the other trees. Like, pollination season's like going to be coming to an end soon. I'm like, what's going on with this tree? And finally he goes, it's ready. I went out the other day and it's covered in flowers. I'm like, hot dog. I get my pollen, all my equipment, grab my intern, we get in the car. It's a long drive. It's like 3.5 hours to get to this tree from where we were at. We were in Southwest Virginia at Meadowview, where Mark was saying we have our research farm. So we drive out to this place up in Kentucky, and we get out there. We hike out to the tree, and I look up in the tree, and I don't see any flowers in this tree. I'm going, no, I don't see any flowers in this tree. And he goes, no, I just saw it. When I was up on the hill, you could see them. They're at the top. So they're hard to see, and I'm like, oh. Finally, oh, you know what, I'm going to climb the damn tree. So I get up there and I climb up this tree and I get up to the top and I'm looking everywhere and there's not one single flower on the tree. Right? I mean, and the reason why, the previous year it had flowered and we pulled all those birds off and we sort of damaged it. So it was going to need a year to recover. That doesn't always happen, but we've seen it happen before. We sometimes screw it up when we're working on those trees, I admit it. So I climbed back down the tree and I said, I thought you said this tree was loaded with flowers. And he goes, I thought it was. And we kind of stand back and then we look at the tree and here's our chestnut tree. Right behind it is a sourwood in full bloom. The first lesson of the day is don't mistake chestnuts for sourwoods. They do bloom at approximately the same time and they look very similar. They look very similar. Okay, let's go. Let's talk about some stuff. I forgot what I put on the presentation, so let's see what I was going to talk about. Okay, finding chestnuts. We need chestnuts because we need them in the breeding program, and we need lots of them. And they're few and far between. And if you go hiking in the woods looking for chestnut trees, they don't just always fall on you, but sometimes they do. And sometimes someone calls whole groves. Sometimes. But mostly, if you're looking for chestnut trees, they're hard to find. Sometimes you stumble across them, but when you're looking, they're hard to find. But basically, this is the best time of year to look for chestnuts. Because right now, if they are flowering, they look like that. Okay, all right, disclaimer, that's a Chinese chestnut. It's covered in catkins. If you drive through the neighborhood, you're probably going to see that right now, right? On my way in this morning, I stopped at a chestnut tree that I'd like to collect Chinese seeds from, and I clipped this off the chestnut tree. Here's what the flowers are right now. Chinese are ahead of Americans. So for now and for the next several weeks, the American chestnuts are going to be covered in flowers like this, if they're flowering. But of course, American chestnuts might have weak canopies because they're blighted and they're thin and they're dying. But a lot of chestnuts out there right now are flowering, and they're going to have female flowers on them. It's a great time to spot them.
Are you saying they bloom the same time as Chinese chestnut 2 weeks later?
I'm saying that they bloom about a week to 2 weeks later. And depending on elevation and where in the country you are, they bloom earlier in the south than they do in the north. They bloom later at higher elevations than at low elevations, right? So it all depends on where you work. But all I'm saying is, if you're in a place where you think you might be able to find American chestnuts, search this way first. Look for flowers. Look out over the landscape. When we were, I was walking down the hall and I looked out that window and I was able to see out that window. I looked across that whole landscape, that hillside, to see if I saw any. I didn't, because they're few and far between. But that's what I look for, is trees that are covered in blooms like that. It's a good time to find them, all right? So, did everybody get a smell of this? Right? Go to, in your neighborhood, has anybody been noticing this smell? Go back to your neighborhood. If you live in town, right? For the last 2 weeks, my town, I'll smell this all over town. I'm riding my bike and all of a sudden I smell it again. I look around, sure it is. There's a Chinese chestnut. Then I ride my bike a little bit further, smell it again. There's another Chinese chestnut. right? If you're in town, you should be smelling this right now because Chinese chestnuts are all over the eastern United States. They're usually in town. And there's a tip for you. If you find a chestnut tree growing in town, it's a Chinese chestnut. And if you find a chestnut tree and you're up on the Appalachian Trail, it's an American chestnut. Not always, but most of the time.
Do you have any flowers that we are all familiar with that American chestnut usually blooms the same time as?
The Chinese chestnut.
Well, so you get your Chinese and your sours, and American sort of overlaps both of those.
Okay, I mean like.
As far as lookalikes.
No, I don't mean lookalikes. I mean forsythias and hydrangeas and common flowers that people have in their gardens.
Mountain laurel just about finishes up now.
Yeah, mountain laurel's finished
Mountain
up
laurel.
now.
Just about finishes and the petals run
Japanese
around.
dogwoods, I think, Asian dogwoods
Kusa
just finished
dogwoods
up.
in full
I think
bloom.
so.
First 2 weeks
But,
of June.
First weeks of June.
Yeah, first 2 weeks of June.
if for American or for,
American, for the Atkins.
I would say all June.
All June.
Yeah, all June. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are flowering now. Not as many. Yeah, we had a lot of things come early, and then a lot of things are still coming, right? So your maples are
They
they
finish.
don't count,
This
but
is a
dogwoods
great
are
year for
young.
blooms.
Yeah, but this one is because of its unique smell. Right now, you know, when you're driving around town, and so I've had people tell me where there were chestnuts in the mountains, and I went during this time of the year, and I was hiking on the trail, and all of a sudden I caught a whiff of this, and I knew I was close. And I started looking, and I was able to find not only the chestnut trees, but the ones that had the flowers, because it was the right time of the year. So you guys have a few weeks, especially in the high country, where they're going to be blooming over the next couple of weeks. And it's a good year for blooming. But here's what I wanted to point out. Okay, so drive around, look around, search the forest understory. If you're out hiking around in the mountains looking for chestnut trees, and remember, I have an assignment for you, and it's everyone in this room has to go find a chestnut tree. And it has to be an American. When you're out driving around, when you're hiking around in the woods, remember, you're going to find something like that in the forest understory. You know, little things like that. Maybe like this. This is a good size for what you're going to find in the understory, right? So if you come to a place where there's American chestnuts, more often you're going to find little ones like that versus ones that are big and flowering. And they're going to be blighted cankers and dead stumps in the area, right? Because of course they're kind of coming up and they're dying. I forgot to throw in a slide and a very important thing. Well, I'm not going to add it now, I'll just tell you. Disturbed sites. If you're in the right place, and we're going to talk in a minute about where are good places for chestnuts, but if you're in a place where chestnuts ought to be, and there's been a power line put in, or a gas line, or a fire, or a blowdown, or any other disturbance, even a new road, go search there. The chestnuts that are in the understory, they suddenly open that up, and like Mark was saying, chestnuts are the fastest growing tree, right? The wild chestnuts in those sites are going to spring up. And you're going to suddenly find lots of trees. Some of them will be like this. Some of them will be taller than me and putting out flowers. They don't even have to be that big to put out flowers. So go to disturbed sites if you're trying to find chestnut trees. All right.
Yeah. So,
Oh yeah, you had a question. Sorry.
so, I mean, some American chestnuts escape blight, right?
Yes.
And is it that typically found like in really steep terrain with water, like?
Nothing that typical about where you find them. So, well, here's a couple of things. Some of them. Oh wait, you set that back up. So here's a couple things about the chestnuts that escape blight. Some trees escape blight for long enough to get pretty big and produce flowers, and then they might start getting blight and dying back. But some of the trees we find out there are pretty big. Some of them escape blight for so long that they're huge trees. For instance, there's a tree in Maine that's 125 feet tall right now. We don't suspect that that tree is naturally blight resistant. We think it just escaped. And that's a pretty tall tree. The interesting thing is, its diameter is only about 10, 12 inches in diameter. But it's in this dense forest, right? When you're in a dense forest, you grow tall and straight. When you're growing in an open field, you grow broad crowned, just like oaks do, right? Oaks do the same thing in the forest. If they're in a tight spacing, tall and straight, reaching for that canopy, trying to compete, out in the open, broad crown. So we have trees like that that have escaped and are really tall. We have lots of them. And sometimes we'll get tree climbers to climb up in them to help do the pollination work. And some of them, the canopies are just out of reach. But there's something else. There's trees that we call large surviving American chestnuts. And those are large surviving Americans. LSAs is what we like to call them. LSAs have natural resistance to the blight. And they survive. And these are sometimes really big trees. Now that doesn't mean they don't get the blight. They get it. And sometimes you'll get some branch dieback, some flagging, whole section of the tree may die. But the trees put up this great fight. They callus over. And they, after living with blight, like fully blighted trees, survive for decades and continue to produce flowers and we get to work with those trees for a long time. Those are interesting to us. And it's a shame that when blight came through, that the reaction was to go and cut down all the chestnut trees before blight killed them so that they could use the timber, because there's probably a lot more LSAs that were accidentally cut down. And now we want to use them in the breeding program. But we do have a dozen or more trees that are naturally resistant to the blight, or tolerant, I should say. That's the word we use nowadays. We say tolerant. Anyway, so search for trees either by looking for the flowers this time of year. In the fall, you can find the burrs. You can also look for the burrs on the floor of the forest. And I'm going to pass around these burrs in a minute when I'm talking about burrs more. But you can look those, not those. These are the burrs. If you find these on the forest floor, there's a chestnut nearby. Doesn't mean it's producing viable nuts, but at least it's producing flowers. All right? Next slide, please. So where are you going to look? Anywhere? No, they're not everywhere in the forest. As Mark said, sometimes you might find a few here and there in places where chestnut wasn't dominant. But if you really want to find chestnuts now, you have to go to where the places in the mountains where chestnuts used to be the dominant tree. That's where, after years of attrition and dieback, you still have lots of remaining chestnuts, right? And so typically, you're going to find chestnuts on south and east-facing slopes in the high country. So you're going to have to get up in elevation, get hiking up there in the Appalachian Mountains. You can find them in other places, and I want you to look other places. But for your assignment, where I said you all have to find a chestnut tree, start with something more in the high country, where it's going to be easier, and then find the south east-facing slopes, right? Because those are drier sites. And American chestnut likes drier sites. If you're in wet sites, you're probably not going to find any. Then look for chestnut oaks and or blueberries. They indicate dry, acidic soils and warm, sunny, south-facing slopes, right? Now, that's opposed to those cooler slopes where you're going to find lots of maples, where you might find oaks, but they're going to be red and or white oaks. You know, if you've got a lot of black locusts and things like that. You're on the wrong side of the mountain, and you might not find them. So you have to go to where, I think the best indicator that I see, when I find chestnut trees, I always find them associated with chestnut oaks, and oftentimes with blueberries, because of that dry acidic soil that all those trees like. So get up in the high elevation, find those warmer slopes, and then look for chestnut oaks, and then start looking for chestnut trees. Look for them in the sky, or look for sprouts like that. Also, here's one thing. I'm working with a few spatial ecologists. One guy in particular, John Scrivani, and I have been trying to come up with metrics. Well, a lot of people are doing this. I shouldn't say that this is like our project, but a lot of people are trying to help us hone in on the best places to find American chestnut, right? So we're looking at all these different ecosystem parameters, like dryness of the site and soil and underlying bedrock and all these things. And there's a lot that goes into that model. Anyway, we went out to a bunch of sites to see if we could find chestnuts. And the first couple places we went to where we said, for sure there will be chestnuts here. Sure enough, we found chestnuts. Then we went to this one site and said, for sure there will be chestnuts here. It was southeast facing, it was up in the mountains, it was a nice dry site, good soil. lots of chestnut oaks nearby. We couldn't find any chestnuts. We went back and we did a little research on the former land use. That wasn't always a forest. It used to be agriculture land. They had cleared it, and in doing so, they cleared all the chestnuts off that land and used it for 100 years as agriculture. Then they turned it back into forest, and all the surrounding species moved in. Well, what didn't move in was chestnuts, because there weren't chestnuts to move into the site. So there's just one more thing to keep in mind when you're looking for chestnuts. So go to perfect sites. You're not always going to find them. Next slide. Okay. I was talking about how we're looking at different ecosystem parameters and trying to decide where the best places to find chestnuts are. I did a close-up. We've got maps that cover the entire eastern United States, where we look at different ecoregions, and we break down ecoregions based on climate, annual precipitation, soil content, underlying bedrock. We cross-reference those to FIA data to try to estimate where the most chestnuts were in the past, so we know where to go looking for chestnuts now. So I bring this to your attention as, are you all from West Virginia? Are people you're all from West Virginia, or at least pretty nearby? Not everybody? You're not? You're from Virginia though, you're from Roanoke.
Do you have a passport?
Here's Roanoke. Here's Roanoke. So here, let's see here. So we're right about here, right?
Further down.
All right, a little bit. We're right about here, right? I didn't put the metrics because it gets really messy, but I just would show you, and so putting it up on the screen, we lose a little the nuances in how these are colored. But I don't know if you can tell, but this is the sort of the darker shade here.
Yeah.
This represents where chestnut was the dominant tree in the forest. And this is where you would get that 25% of the trees were American chestnut. So if you're looking for American chestnuts and you stick to here, and again, here, but on the south-facing slope, a little bit higher elevation, a place that hadn't been, cleared of all the trees 100 years ago, and look for those chestnut oaks, you're bound to find chestnuts here. And in some cases, lots of them. You're bound to find whole groves where you're going to find hundreds of chestnut sprouts like that. So that's where you're looking in here. Here, there's still a lot of them, not as much as here. It starts to go down here, and then as you go this way, the numbers become fewer, and up here, they were few and far between. That doesn't mean you couldn't find chestnuts anywhere in West Virginia, because chestnuts were really popular in West Virginia, but this is where you're going to find the most. Next slide a second. This is the same map, but I took out the ecoregions and threw in the counties. Now, I want you to think about what county, and I didn't put the names, but I hope everyone can identify their county and maybe some of the surrounding counties near them. I want you to look at where you're at and think about what I posted as an ecoregion, or think about some of the counties around us and which counties you might be interested in going to. Do you know of some nature areas, great places to go hiking? Can you think of any place where there was a disturbance, particularly here, down here where we said chestnuts were most abundant, or maybe up this way, we find a lot of them in the Manahagahila. You can tell I'm from the north. I'm a Yankee. That's right. That's
We're
right.
stuck.
All right. So I just would say go back and forth. So thinking about the counties, go back to that last map one more second. Okay, and then think about where in here and here do you want to go searching for chestnuts?
What are the dots? What are those?
Yeah. So there's something we're working on right now. It's called the Landscape Genomics Project, in which we are trying to go to all these different ecoregions and collect X number of samples of chestnut leaves based on the metrics that I talked about. So here we would want more sampling, here a lot, here less, and here just a few. But we're collecting the leaf samples and we're extracting the DNA, and then we're trying to sequence the genomes of the trees throughout the eastern United States and cross-reference that to the geospatial parameters that we were talking about and look for how trees are adapted to different environments based on their seed zone and the environments that they're adapted to, and then study that spatially to see how American chestnut changes genetically or morphologically over both both spatially and then based on different environments, and then help use that information, help us figure out how we're going to restore American chestnut, adding climate change models to that. So, for instance, looking at these different ecoregions, if we're going to replace chestnut here, we might choose to use material both from here and from here, right? And so that the trees that we're planting are moving a little bit north, helping something we call assisted migration. But just as a first step, we're just trying to understand how American chestnut changes genetically over the landscape. These all represent samples that we've already collected, and in some cases we need to collect more or resample. So the red is a site where we'd like to go get samples from. Black is we're done collecting. We got some of these areas, we've got enough samples, and then the places where there's no dots are the ones we haven't even gone to yet. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, hey, I can go around here and find chestnut trees, I might want to talk to you about your hunt for chestnut trees, and if you find them, especially in the next couple of weeks while DNA extraction is good, while the leaves are young, we actually need to get some samples from these places. So we need to find chestnut trees for our breeding program, and we need to find them for some of the science that we're working on. So that's one of the reasons I'm asking you guys to help us find these trees. And so I want you to go into these ecoregions. Again, I would suggest you start in a place where the chestnuts are abundant, because you're going to for sure find them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about making sure you're good at your chestnut ID, and then we're going to talk about how you can record information using TreeSnap. But I'm also going to have you, if you find a bunch of trees here, and then you decide to get really crazy and you go find some here, and then you call me up and you say, hey Tom, I found a tree here. That's the one I want. I mean, I want them here too, but I really want the ones that are going to be really hard to find too, because they're going to be genetically different from these ones that are close to each other.
Do you have a copy of that map on the internet or somewhere where we can get access to it?
I could probably make it. No, not yet, because we're still actually working. Like the guy I'm working on this with. We just developed this like last week. I mean, it's 2 years worth of research that went into this, but it's all been in like modeling. So we don't have it yet. But what I was thinking of
Take a picture of
doing.
Can you take a picture of it?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Lots of slide there, isn't it? You send it to me, I'll get it distributed.
You guys want a picture of that?
Mm-hmm.
I'll send you that. I'll send you the whole presentation. I'll convert it to a PDF.
We can put it on the webpage.
Yeah.
If we think we know where there's some obvious ones
Yeah.
that aren't close, that we're not going back to in the very near future,
Yeah.
do you want us to tell you where they are and how to? I think there's one at Twin Falls State Park.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know that one?
That sounds familiar.
I
Mark, you know
planted
that
some
one?
there, but that was only a couple years ago.
Does anybody here know Devon Duncan? She's with the Southern Soil Conservation District. She's planted a few trees at Twin Falls, some of these backcross trees.
Right.
There's one that's producing birds at Twin
Oh,
Falls.
that would not be one that was planted then, no.
The superintendent there, you can just get in touch with him. He's the one that told us where it was, and it's right on the road.
Oh, really?
And it's all gnarly and all blighted out.
Okay.
But it,
Yeah.
2 years
Sounds like
ago,
American.
it's still producing birds.
Yeah. Oh, it's producing birds. So
Oh,
great.
do that.
Why
Yeah.
don't you go on down there, Mark?
And you
Maybe
just
I'm
call,
on the way back from Abingdon.
you can call the superintendent and say, is it still alive, and he can tell you. Because he's the one that told us where it was.
Okay.
Mark, you got that?
Yep.
Okay. That's great. See, that's what makes the hair stand up on my
Are you
arm when I
saying
hear
that-
about that.
Are
That's
you
really
saying that the coffee-colored areas are the most dominant part where the chestnut are?
This is where chestnut used to be
And
more.
why is it between those two areas, which is this spine where West Virginia and Virginia run together, why is that much of less urban area? Why would that be? I mean, if they were dominant Appalachians, that's right where the George Washington Forest and the Monongahela come together, and why is that shown with so much of less chestnut
Well,
quantity?
just less than here.
Yeah.
Right, still plenty. And we find plenty in here, but for whatever reason, I don't know.
So is that an eastern facing slope to the Appalachians?
It's a
You
hollow.
got
No,
another area,
no.
which makes it more
right?
Yeah, you got those good to go.
So just to clarify, chestnuts were everywhere on this map where you see the color. It's until you get out here that you didn't have chestnuts. There were just fewer. There was just so many here, probably because of the underlying bedrock and the soil. Mark, are you going to answer that?
Okay, so I could give you a little bit of history about that. We began working on chestnut blight in the George Washington back in the late 70s, early 80s. We've also done a lot of work in the Monongahela. And I'm here to tell you the GW is a lot drier than Monongahela. It's a lot drier site. The whole blasted thing is, compared to the Monongahela.
And we find lots of trees here. I mean, this is, so I'm from Virginia, and you could see, you could tell I'm from Virginia. I collected most of these. So I've been traveling around here. I mean, we just have hundreds of trees. You know, we just find them. I mean, some of these hills are lousy with trees, but there used to be more here.
Yeah.
So why? Probably because of a combination of soil and bedrock and climate and annual precipitation.
Well, that's kind of like the beginning of the Ridge and Valley problem, so maybe that
Yeah.
kind of.
I mean, a lot, but don't be misled. There's a ton of chestnuts in here, and there's a ton of chestnuts in here, and there's a ton of chestnuts in here. But you know, it's just there was more here. Okay, all right, let's go on. Everyone has that clear in their mind, and we'll send this to you. Yeah.
Now, there's little marks, like, I don't know what they are, but like, they're, say, right below Charleston. You have three, Lincoln County, Kanawha County, and, yeah, what are those things?
It's just a mapping error.
Okay, because, I mean, over here, you've got
These little things.
yeah, I was just wondering what those,
That's what ArcMaps decided is the county boundaries.
Oh, you know, those might be cities or something.
Well, here's what it's got for Charleston. Let's see, what does it have for Roanoke? Blacksburg. I think it's going circles. Yeah, or maybe that's a very tiny version.
yeah, there's like one right there, right in front of you, I mean, right at your waist.
Lower left.
This is like super tiny county. That's super tiny county too.
I'm not aware of this super tiny county.
Yeah, nobody knows about them. They're too tiny. Nobody even lives there. It's just a tiny county.
Unincorporated.
Okay, let's go on. I'm running out of time. Next slide. All right. So when you're up there, I want to make sure that everybody can identify an American chestnut. And Mark already gave you the overview, so I know you're experts on American chestnuts, and I know you can tell the difference between an American and a Chinese and a European. But I'll tell you what, these are the ones that get you when you're hiking in the woods. It's a pretty small room, right? Can I just go into the center of the room and give you a couple of these? We're calling these American chestnuts. These are actually hybrids, but like I said, they're in this. Hey, hang on one second. Let me show you guys something real quick. Mark was telling you guys about small stem assays. So I do a lot of small stem assay work now. It's become a big part of our breeding program. We use them to progeny test our trees, and we're now pre-screening trees before we plant them in the orchard. So we can screen hundreds of trees and then only plant, maybe 50 or 60 in a plot. And then over the next few years, we'll sort that down to one tree. But we can start with 300 and get it down to one, because there's a lot of genes involved in blight resistance, right? So this is a tree that was small stem assay. We inoculated it. You can see this was one that didn't make the grade, but we keep it. It resprouted from the stem. And so I thought it was a good example of what you're going to find in the forest, a tree that died from blight. So I'll pass this around, and you guys can see what the blight looks like on the tree. But yeah, I'll just pass that around. While you're looking at it, though, I want you guys to really look at those leaves, and we're going to talk about them in a minute, but just note the difference between the American chestnut and the most classic lookalike of the American beech. Now, I know you guys know your American chestnut and your American beech, but I'm going to tell you, I've been doing this for years, and when I'm hiking in the woods, I'll be looking at these beech, and I'll be looking at these, and all of a sudden I'll be like, wait, that's an American chestnut. And then I'll sit there and I'll stare at it. And it'll be a beech that just happens to be a little bit longer, and the teeth are just a little bit more pointy, maybe a little more hooked, right? But I tell you, you start staring at these things too long, and you start thinking they're American chestnuts, and then you call your boss, and you say, I found all these American chestnuts, and then you get a reprimanding for not knowing the difference between an American chestnut and a beech. So I'll tell you, when the beech starts to look like American chestnut, just remember they're beech trying to fool you. And when you actually see the American chestnut, all of a sudden you'll just be like, oh yeah, oh right, okay. When you see an American chestnut, you know it, but the beech will fool you. So here's what I always use as my guide. When I start looking at beech too long, wondering if it's an American chestnut or not, just look at the bark, and then you'll know.
And the buds.
Huh?
And the buds.
Right, it's got that elongated bud.
And the buds, yes, well, yeah, for sure. And the buds, obviously, the buds are a really good giveaway. This one, unfortunately, doesn't have any.
And the beech nuts too are different. Beech nuts.
Well, that's true too, but sometimes, like this time of year, you're just going to see the leaves and the bark, right? I don't think there's leaf buds on either, on any of them anymore, right now. They're past that. But anyway, just look at the bark. Here's the one look-alike that has me hiking through brambles. Because I'll see a tree way out there, and I don't know why, but when there's a whole mess of these leaves, you know, and there's a tree out there and it's just kind of more like a forest, for some reason they just look like chestnut. No wonder why they call it chestnut oak. Because you'll hike through those brambles and you get about 10 yards from it, and then you go, dang. So just remember the difference between a chestnut, a beech, and a chestnut oak.
That's a chestnut.
And here are, yeah, and I'll pass this around too. I mean, I know you guys know all these things, right? But just remember that the American chestnut, where'd that American go? One of those Americans. Okay, let me stand by this tree. I'm going to go over this in some slides, but just remember that with the American chestnut, what you're looking for is a canoe-shaped leaf, right? It's canoe-shaped. It's longer than it is wide, and it's tapered on both ends. Now, it's more tapered on this tip, but anyway, here, like this one, this is a guy. I said tapered on both ends, and I picked one that wasn't tapered at all on the end.
Is that a hybrid too?
If they're rounded, it either is a Chinese or it's a beech, right? Because the beech are rounded, unless they're actually elongated. So you're looking for a leaf like this. Now, the next thing that you're looking for is you're looking for these teeth. They all got teeth that are, what are they? They are pointy like a breaking wave. So you take a close look at these. The beech tends to not be. They tend to just be, you know, a tapered point, and they don't curl like a breaking wave. The beech are rounder and sometimes come to a little point. So, right, that's one of the things. And then, of course, juxtapose that to the chestnut oak, which has teeth that are rounded, right? And that's really the big difference, because a lot of these can be this sort of canoe-shaped also, right? They can be longer than they are wide. They could also, what's that? Yeah, well, they're very tapered, as opposed to these, which are rounded, right? And that'll be the big difference. So when you get in close, you'll always be able to tell the chestnut oak when you get in close. But it's when you're further away and you have bad eyesight like me that you'll mistake them, right? But just remember, and a lot of times they're tapered and they come wider at the tip and then come to a point, whereas American chestnuts should have that nice canoe shape where they're tapered on both ends and long and narrow. And then the beech, of course.
And then the chinkapin oak leaves look like chestnut oak leaves too. A little different leaf, like the way they point on the edges of them. But
Yeah.
It's a chinkapin oak.
Yes, right.
Not
Yeah.
rounded.
Yeah. But the one thing is that where you're going to find your American chestnuts, two species you're always going to find there also are going to be chestnut oak and beech. Now that doesn't mean everywhere you find beech you'll find chestnuts, because beech are everywhere. But if you find chestnuts, you're probably going to find these other two species with them. So just wanted to point out those two lookalikes. All right, next slide. What's that? Okay. Well, a lot of this. So, no, it's okay, because we're getting pretty close. So, the next thing I was going to talk about was the difference between the Chinese and the American, and Mark already did that. But, just as a refresher, maybe I should have you guys do this.
There.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I wanted to take us back here.
All right, so do you guys remember, anybody name the most obvious key differences between American and Chinese chestnut?
Glabrous leaves.
Hairy leaves on the other side,
Glabrous.
glossy on this side. It's like so obvious. But let me tell you, let me say one thing about that. If it's growing in the shade, it's not going to be glossy or hairy.
Brown
So if you
stems
see a
versus
tree and you're
red.
not sure what it is, and you pull off a leaf and you go, oh, it's dull and there's no hairs on the other side, and you send it to me, I'm going to be like, that is an awesome Chinese chestnut. You should enjoy those nuts. You have to get a sun leaf. They have to get some sun. But when they grow in the sun, you got it. Very glossy on one side and hairy on the other side.
Oh, they have to grow in the sun.
Yeah, the leaves have to be growing in the sun.
Okay.
If the leaves are growing in the shade,
Okay.
they don't show this telltale trait. But then the other thing, of course, well, there's the bark. Yeah, what about the bark?
Hairy.
Red on the American, brown on the Chinese.
The American is red.
The American is red and the Chinese are tannish greenish. Yeah. Let's see if we got it right on this one. I forgot to check. Oh, yes. Okay. We're so good. Yeah. I think this tree has good resistance too. This is an earlier generation. This is a B1 crossed with a B2. So this is very early generation. So this tree comes from a family that shows very good resistance, and it was still selected for American traits. So you can get some early generation. This is only about 75–80% American, right? And yet it's indistinguishable. But anyway, so the leaves on the Chinese compared to this. Look at, remember we were talking about that whole breaking wave, hooked teeth? Look at that Chinese. Barely has teeth, right? It's got teeth, but nothing like the American, right? They're not tapered and long and hooked like a breaking wave. Stupid Chinese. I'm just kidding. I love Chinese chestnuts. I'm not allowed to eat the American chestnuts we harvest because we need them for the breeding program, so I eat a lot of Chinese chestnuts. Every fall when we go camping, we roast them over an open fire, and they're good. So if you find a Chinese chestnut tree, I'm serious, harvest some nuts from it. And go to our website and get the recipes for roasting them. They're actually really, really good. They're not as good as Americans. But let me tell you something. If you find an American chestnut, don't roast them. I need those seeds. Okay?
What's your
Roast all the
website?
Chinese you can get.
You said go to our website. What's your website?
www.acf, as in Alpha Charlie Frank, .org.
Could you, yeah, could you rely on the shape of the base of the leaf as an indicator?
It is an indicator that we use when we're making selections, but it's subtle. I wouldn't say go out and try to identify a tree using that. I would say get a sunleaf and look for it if it's glossy on this side and hairy on this side. In a minute, I'm going to pass around a magnifying glass, and let you guys look at the underside of the leaf. Look at all those hairs. Okay, next slide. All right, we kind of went over this already. Americans are beautiful, Chinese are glossy, Europeans are smaller, and Japanese are also smaller. These ones are kind of hard. When I get leaf samples in the mail, a lot of times we have to actually throw them under a microscope and look at the glandular leaf hairs and stuff like that. But Mark pointed out a couple of differences. It helps if you get a piece of the stem. And then the cheek of pin. And this is not a great picture because it doesn't show the hairiness on the underside of the leaf, but we can definitely see it in these samples here. They look like they're covered in velvet, right? It's kind of like a soft velvet, just thousands of little tiny leaf hairs. Let's go to the next slide. Let's not belabor this. we've kind of talked about these differences too, and at this point, I'm going to pass around these samples. Again, I assume most of you have seen some chestnuts, either Chinese or American, before in your lives, and you know about these little tiny porcupines that hurt so bad if you touch them. But this is the American, and I'm going to pass this one around. These are chinkapins, and you guys can come up and look at these later if you want, if you're interested, but 1 nut per bird. Look at how tiny those are, right? So when we find them in the woods, if you can't tell what it is, look at the burr. You'll know. But anyway, here's the American and here's the Chinese, and right off the bat, you'll see the difference in size of the nuts. The American chestnut nuts are pretty tiny. I'll pass these around, but look at how big those Chinese chestnuts are. And it's subtle, I don't know if you can tell, but the Chinese chestnut burrs, the spines, are much more coarse than the Americans. I'm going to let you take a look at that. And then the Chinese chestnut nuts are smooth, whereas the American chestnuts have little fine hairs all over them. And why don't we start at this end and go back and forth, and you guys can take a look at those.
I sort of said this before, aren't the American chestnuts themselves actually sweeter?
Yes. That's what people say. I don't know, I'm not allowed to eat the American chestnuts. I don't know what they actually taste like. I only get to eat Chinese chestnuts. Okay, let's go on. I have a feeling you guys are going to be good at this. Just a few other subtle things. You can tell from a distance, like especially when we're in an orchard, we can spot those Chinese from a mile away just based on the way they branch out. And it doesn't really do any good to hold this up compared to that tree because that's not a good example of how the leaves branch out because it's so tiny. But these ones, I'll point it out to you. See how they come out almost at a right angle? And it makes them look, I guess, bushier, in my opinion, whereas the Americans coming out of those more acute angles seem a little more spread out. But it's subtle. Don't worry about that. Look for the glossiness and the hairy underside of the leaves. That's what's going to tell you the difference. Okay, next slide. We already talked about that, the dull versus shiny, the teeth. I don't know, with no strong indentation. Just keep going. Oh, the stipules. Okay, so these ones don't have their stipules on them anymore. They're a little bit past. But the American chestnuts are kind of narrow at the bottom. They're thin and narrow. And look at the Chinese stipule. Look at how wide and flared they are. So you can see them. And then, of course, you guys were mentioning how you can tell on a beach, right? And those ones are really long. They stick out like a finger length, right? So you can look at that if you want. But again, the leaves are what you're going to want to look at. That's the easiest way to tell all these different species apart. These are hairy. Excellent. Okay, so you guys are now experts on identifying American chestnut. And remember a little rule of thumb. If you're up in the mountains, in the forests, and you find a chestnut, it probably really isn't pure American chestnut. If you're in town and there's a giant tree growing in your neighbor's backyard and it's dropping burrs all over, it's probably a Chinese chestnut. Just based on the location, that's where the Chinese chestnuts were planted. And the American chestnuts, they're only going to be found usually up in the wild. Now there's exceptions to those rules. Certainly we found some Americans down on farms and other places. We find them in the Piedmont, places you wouldn't think to find American chestnuts. We do sometimes find. They're just few and far between. And every once in a while you'll find some sort of Asian-like tree way up in the forest, which I'm running out of time, so I'll tell you this is another anecdote. But last year we were searching for chestnut trees for the leaf snap program. I'm sorry, for the landscape genetics program, and also because we have to find Americans so that we can collect the germplasm. So we were up in this part of the forest. We found lots of little trees like those, and then we saw a couple that were flowering, but they were protected by a sea of brambles. And I didn't want to hike through all those brambles just to get a leaf sample. I just said, let's come back in the fall and we'll hike through all these brambles. And we're out in the middle of the forest, right? We're out in the Forest Service. We had to go up this Forest Service road. It was a big hike. we were going to come back in the fall just to collect the seeds, because we could see it was flowering. The next fall, we get out there, and sure enough, we're just hiking through all these brambles, and they're tearing us apart, and we're scraped up, and it was a mess. And we get to this tree, we start pulling off birds off the tree, and one of the birds came off and had a leaf attached to it, and it looked like this. And I said, I think we can stop now. I don't know how that got up there in the forest, but you never know. Let's just say you're up in the woods, you go to the right location, and you're going to go looking for trees. I'm going to tell you what supplies to bring with you. I want you to bring your phone, and you are going to download TreeSnap. Go to your app store now. And where's my app store? Oh, there it is. Go to your app store and simply type in, oh, you have to be connected to Wi-Fi when you download it. So I'm not right now. Go to your app store, be connected to Wi-Fi, and download TreeSnap. You'll get this nice little icon on your phone. It's free, it's easy, and it only takes a couple minutes to download on your phone. Now when you're hiking in the woods and you find that tree, I want you to click on TreeSnap. And it's going to bring up a page that has all these different species. The people who developed TreeSnap are trying to collect data on trees that, for some reason or another, are being affected by pests or pathogens. American chestnut is the #1. We've been doing more work with American chestnut with this app than any of these other programs, although they're all great programs. But you're going to click on the very first one that says American chestnut. And this is so easy and so user-friendly that don't worry about it. Go home and play with this today, and maybe even hike in the woods and see if you can find a tree. But it's really straightforward. So let me just walk you through a couple things you'll want to know. The first thing you want to do is take a picture. And when you click on image, it turns on your phone. What I want you to do when you're in the woods is take a picture of the tree, of course. There you go. I got a picture of the tree, right? Did you open up TreeSnap? Okay, click on American chestnut. Let's look at that in a minute. Then the next thing I want you to do, though, after you take a picture of the tree, and this is very important, so everybody pay attention, I want you to take a picture of the front and the back of a leaf, preferably one that's growing in the sun. Why do you think I want you to do that here? So that I know if it's an American chestnut or not. I can usually tell from the picture if it's an American chestnut just from a picture of the front and back of the leaf, as long as it was a leaf that had some sun. Now, a lot of times these trees are growing in the canopy and they don't have a lot of leaves like this. Take a picture anyway. Based on location and a picture of this, I would know it was an American chestnut, and we can come back. And when you're all done, well, let me just get out of this. Okay, when you're done, hit done. And then it's going to ask you some data, some information. It's going to ask you if the tree is flowering, if it has catkins, if it has chestnut blight, a couple different things. One thing is you're just going to enter the information if you know, and if you don't know, just put I don't know. And then you're going to hit submit. And what it does is it locates the location. It automatically puts your GPS location from where you took those pictures in here. So you just take some pictures of it so that I can identify it or confirm that it's an American. It gives me the GPS coordinates, it gives me pictures of it, and it gives me data about that tree. And you hit submit entry. In this case, I'm hitting cancel. But I'm in the woods and I don't have internet connection. Don't worry. You collect all that data. It will collect your GPS coordinates and everything you entered. It saves it. You go ahead, you hike around the woods, you get all your different trees in there. Every submission gets saved in your phone. And when you get back home, you hit upload your observations, and we'll send them all to a database that I will access, and then I'll be able to see all your submissions. Really easy to use. Now, when it says under comments, if you don't mind, would you please let me know if there is one or more flowering trees in the area, or if there are one or more little saplings in the area, small enough that we could dig up and transplant. Flowering trees aren't the only way we can collect germplasm. If we can go up and dig up a seedling like that, of course, if it was this, I would not keep it because this is a Chinese chestnut. I did want to show you guys this because the small stem-assay tinker that healed up nicely, so you can come look at that later. We're almost out of time, but anyway, if it's a small seedling like that, we can dig it up and move that to the GCO, right? If there's lots of them. We don't take them if there's only a couple. We don't want to take all the seedlings from an area and extirpate the trees from that location. But if there's hundreds of them, we might come up and get a couple. All right? So I want to know if there's lots or only few or only one, and if they're flowering or not, and if there's more than one flowering tree. That helps us decide whether or not we want to go back there to try to get stuff from that tree. All right? So I think I talked all about that, right? Always bring this whenever you hike, even if you're not intending to look for chestnut trees. So just go to record all of your data. Remember to get pictures of the leaves. Make sure to know if it's flowering, and it even works when you're out of range. That's the most important stuff as far as this goes. Hey, while you're out there, if you don't mind grabbing a leaf, you can send it to me. You can send me a leaf. You can write down some information about where it was. Just because I have the GPS coordinates, it's not always easy to find these trees. And I can tell you, we've gone on some wild goose chases trying to track trees down from their GPS coordinates. And I say, you know, geez, I know I saw that tree last year when we were here, but now we can't find it. Well, if you write down any notes about how you got to that tree, like you have to take this trail, it's a hidden trail, and go off this social trail, and you know, up behind the rocks, you know, it's behind this, you know, whatever. That helps. That helps us go back and find it. Another thing you can do is carry flagging with you. Take a little bit of flagging, tie it around the base of the tree. Now, if it's right on the trail, somebody's probably going to come and pull it off, but you can do that anyway. But if you put it around this little tiny tree here, and I can go back into the woods and find it in the wintertime when this is dormant. Wintertime's the best time to dig them up. So if there's a little bit of flagging on it, then all I have to do is find the tree with the flagging on it. I'm pretty good at identifying these things even when they're dormant, but it's easier when they're flagging on it, you know, especially if I'm hiking around the woods. A couple other things to bring with you. Bring your field guide, bear market, got American beech there, American chestnut here, and chestnut oak right there. You know, just keeping your guide handy, so if you want to look it up, you won't need to because you're experts now. I bring a little magnifying glass with me so that, you know, if I'm ever not totally sure about what it is, because sometimes they're like these hybrids and they look very American, and then I look at it and I go, no, it's got wheat ears, you know. I'll say, that's a hybrid. There's hybrids out there in the woods. And I bring my gators that were sprayed with pyrethrin so I don't get ticks.
What percentage of trees that you hear about that you actually have the opportunity to investigate?
I don't know what percent. I go and find a lot of them. More often than not, I will tell Mark about them, or I'll tell somebody else about them. And people who live closer-ish, people who live within a few hours, may go track it down if we can confirm it's a pure American. More often than not, if we're not certain it's an American, I'll ask the person who submitted the sample to send me a leaf or something. A lot of times people will call me up and say, hey, I found this giant chestnut tree, it's big, and it's my neighbor's farm. I'll say, send me a leaf sample, or at least take a picture of the front and back of the leaf and send it to me. But if we can confirm it's a pure American and it's one that we're going to want, we'll get somebody out there to look at it. And oftentimes we'll be out there working with it. Next slide. I think I'm just about done. And if you don't have, what do you do when you don't have a mobile device? How many people do not have a mobile device and can't use TreeSnap? Nobody. You can all use TreeSnap. Only a few can't use TreeSnap. So if you don't have a mobile device, you can't use TreeSnap, that's okay. Grab a leaf sample, record the information. Remember, when you're out there, if you instead of this, bring this, right? Get a leaf sample, write down the directions, try to figure out where you were. We can go back, we can get on Google Earth, and we can find the GPS coordinates, we can map it out, we can get your name and information, all the things that we need. And I'll say, fill out this tree locator form, send it to me with the leaf. You don't need to send a huge box. I don't need a branch. I just need a leaf pressed between some paper, stick it in a yellow envelope, and send it to me with this tree locator form. Again, if it turns out to be what we're looking for, we'll come find it. Next slide. So, we already know these things. I need my chapters, or people who want to work with our chapters, and since you're all going to join CACF, you're now part of the chapter program. Got to scour the mountains and find these things. We need lots of them fast. Our program is dependent on finding a lot of trees, and we're kind of running into a little bit of a bottleneck because we don't have enough unique germplasm for our program. So we've been really trying to push this idea of finding new sources of pure American. We really need to find them, and they're out there. We just need help because, you know, Mark and I can't find them all. So locate and collect seeds and/or sprouts from the new sources. So once we find them, we want to go back. If they're either big enough to produce flowers or they're small enough to dig up. And then we plant them in what I talked about earlier in these germplasm orchards. Next slide. Okay, so here we go. Go ahead and click through these. So, training members and volunteers. This is sort of like a training, except we're doing it in a classroom. We like to go out in the woods and actually go and hike and find chestnut trees. So we're going to probably be doing several of these trainings this summer. We'll let you guys know when they're happening and where, and if you can make it, come on out. We'll review a lot of the stuff we just reviewed today, but we'll bring some gear with us. And we'll actually go out and we'll find some trees, we'll collect some leaf samples, we'll collect data next. Please tell other people and train them. Now that you guys are experts on this, take friends, family, whoever, hiking clubs, hunting clubs. Scouts. Take them out in the woods. Teach them how to ID chestnut trees. Teach them how to use tree snap and have them get out there and find chestnut trees, right? And so what your assignment is, I want you guys to plan a hike and get out there and find a tree. And I think we were talking about a little competition. For everybody who signed up on this list, the person who finds the most new sources of chestnut, I think we were going to, the prize was some of our advanced hybrid chestnut seeds. So the person who finds the most new sources of pure American, we will send you 4 of our most advanced hybrid chestnut seeds. Keep in mind that heavy growing chestnuts requires excellent sites. They have to be on good soil, no clay, not wet, dry, coarse soil. It has to be some amount of sun. It takes a lot of care to take care of chestnut seeds. And when they get big, they drop these sharp burrs all over your yard. And so keep that in mind. But if you're into it, join the competition and find chestnut trees. I'll send you 4 seeds if you're the winner. Yes, sir. I'm also signing you up for the eSprout. That's our electronic newsletter. It's kind of like an electronic version of this, where we have scientists write good stories. Staff members like me take turns writing articles about things that are going on in the chestnut world. There's usually recipes, cool tidbits. They're kind of fun. They come out, what, every other month, I think?
4 times a year, I believe. I'm not sure.
Okay, so they come out pretty often, and it's free. So we don't solicit anything from you. I think there's something in there that says, please join. But that's about it. And we usually don't sell your email address unless it's really good. Okay, get out there, find trees, please. We really need them. Next, is there anything else? Is that it? Yeah, don't forget Tree Snap. Download it. When you get out of here and you have Wi-Fi service, go ahead and download it because it's so easy to use. And I think that's it. That's it.
How long is the competition?
This year you have until the trees go dormant. You have until the trees go dormant because this by fall is when we're going to want to be harvesting seeds. So that's September, early October. We're harvesting seeds, so we really need to know by then. But if we go out in the winter to dig up the seedlings. So we have to know for sure by the time the trees go dormant. So November. Good?
Okay.
Any questions for Mark or me? No?
In the meantime, if you haven't signed in, please sign in before you leave and sign the yellow pad with your email.
Do we need to sign for the second class?
No.
Hey, before you guys leave, please come up and grab a Chestnut magazine. And if you want to check out any of our paraphernalia, trees with chestnut plate on them.
Write down your name, email address, and say, I want you to be on your project, so I'll get your name.
All right, I guess I can turn this thing off.